Hi, Lacey Filipovich from Money School here. I'm here to talk about Scott Pape, the Barefoot Investor. I am a massive fan of Scott's. I do differ in my opinion of his. Hi, I'm Lacey Filipovich from Money School. I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about the Barefoot Investor. I am a massive fan of the Barefoot Investor, Scott Pape, and I recommend you subscribe to his newsletter because they're hilarious and also because he's very sensible. There are, however, a few things that I disagree with him about regarding money. I've talked previously about credit cards. I do disagree with his premise of not having a credit card. The second thing I want to talk to you about today is property. Another thing that Scott talks a lot about in his writing is about how property is not a good investment, and he doesn't recommend it for people. And I think the stats I've seen from him a couple of times have been that basically less than 4 out of 10 people make money in property investing. And he basically thinks it's high risk, and I can totally understand his premises. I can understand what he's talking about when he talks about the fact that it's such a large asset to buy one property can take up an entire portfolio, that you have to use huge amounts of debt to get there, and that it is also risky, that it can decline in value. However, I think it's pretty crazy to neglect what property can do for you. Because of my personal experience, and I have absolutely experienced some positive stuff and some bad stuff to do with property. So I have lost money on property as well as made money on property. And I can understand why there are 6 in 10 people out there not making money on property. And generally they'll be because they rushed in without making a sensible decision or having the right information at hand. The thing that I guess Scott has recommended, I've seen before, about if you want to get into property is buying a share in a company that is property related and that owns property, neglects the reason why property works for people and why, whenever you see the BRW rich list in Australia, 200 people, something like half of them have generally made their first fortune out of property. The reason for that is leverage. Yes, it's debt, but if it grows, it gives you a huge result. And the reason why I tend to advocate for debt on property versus debt on shares, I don't like debt on shares, is that the value of a property is much harder to go to zero. The value of a share can go to a zero much more quickly and with much less fuss, and is much more volatile. Whereas property, yes, it can certainly drop by 50%. We have seen examples in America through the GFC of properties dropping by 50% and more. There is potential that we have a property bubble in Australia, and when you do use debt, you are putting at risk higher amounts. But if you are sensible about your property investing and you learn about your property investing, then it is an opportunity to leverage what you've got to get huge amounts of growth, and the returns on your capital can be much higher. Now, there are also people that go and take this to extremes. We've seen recent examples in the Pilbara of a young couple. I can't remember if they're in their 20s or 30s, but they went and bought 25 properties in the Pilbara. Now, people who do that, it's a recipe for disaster. Doing anything to extremes like that, when you're not the expert and you don't understand what you're doing and you're new to it, has inherent risk in it. But there are certainly ways to own investment property that are lower risk and to manage your risks appropriately. And I would not be financially independent if I hadn't invested in property. So I think it would be neglectful to say to people, ignore property. I think by far the more useful thing would be to give them the skills that they need to be able to invest in property wisely and to make sensible decisions. So rather than just black banning it, I would rather see education. That's my take on it. But I totally understand Scott's approach, and he's taking a lowest common denominator approach of this is how it can work for everybody. And I'm sure it does work with his clients. I just feel like he's missing an opportunity there. So just because Scott Pape says don't do property investing, do the research first. I think you would be unwise to offhand ignore it. And that there is opportunity there. And certainly that's been my personal experience. The trick is in doing it right and having the right education and understanding what you're doing. Okay, that's the second of this series about Scott Pape, and in the third video I'll be talking about something I very strongly disagree with him about that I think is actually dangerous. I'll be back with that one shortly. Bye.